Chapter 15. Deceit awoke moments later, unable to satisfactorily move her hands, shackled. She shook a disheveled tangle of auburn hair from her piercing alien eyes, and focused. The stranger in blue and his time agent bodyguard were hard at work draining the Sid Rat time rotor, or dismantling it. Whatever they thought they were doing, it didn't really matter. She almost smiled. Then she saw Mr. Blue turn his attention to her. "Hello, love." He looked down at her with a sad, almost affectionate smile. Deceit struggled against the restraints she found herself in, subtly demonstrating, "Hey, I'm tied up here and helpless." Mr. Blue knelt next to her. He was taking the bait so far. "Great. You figured it all out?" Deceit was bored, yet maintained a theatrical leer. "Now you're going to turn my plan against me? I was going to pilfer your time capsule to get off this rock, and instead, you turn the tables on this evil, maniacal time lady. Lesson learned. You happy?" The cobalt stranger looked down as he twirled her EM wrench between his fingers deftly. Yes, if you like, eh?" He blasted it with a pulse from his temporal watch, rendering it inert, and tossed it like an empty soda can to the cold floor near her. "Sure you don't want to keep that?" Deceit nodded to the device on the floor. Hopefully. "You never know when you're going to need one of those handy." Mr. Blue grinned. "Doubtfully so. Not going to fall for some weak booby trap this late in the game." Deceit sighed. "Surely. Yes, you've turned the tables on me this time. I'll sit here and twirl my mustache while I figure out what to do next." "Booby, eh?" The stranger in blue returned his attention to his watch. Saber rolled her eyes. Deceit caught her gaze. "How about you, monkey? You seem to think you have everything all figured out." Deceit lured the irritable time agent into revealing what she thought she knew. Saber let loose. "You're just another High Lord with a god complex. You found yourself stranded here during the Time War with a drained, run-down Sid Rat you most likely stole from a museum. You set yourself up a negative photon temporal wave arc with the available power, enveloping the planets in the nearby system with the same negative temporal warp, draining time-capable vehicles, forcing them to land on Vrem." Deceit blinked and looked away. The beautiful time agent continued. "When the final piece of the puzzle arrives, your Sid Rat somehow activates a 1,000-year-old domino effect of cascading perpetual time paradox energy. Let's put all that in a neat, pretty package with a bow. Now, your temporal waveform is complete, repowering this old-ass, crusty Sid Rat enough to transform it into a proto-TARDIS." Deceit looked at her shackles absently, unimpressed, unaffected. "That's TARDIS, love." "Whatever. It was only a theory anyway." Saber finished with authority. "Right." The stranger in blue finished scanning and announced it was time to leave. "We have everything?" Saber looked into the rucksack at her side. With the pilfered parts needed to replace ones aboard Purge, she stated the inventory. Tachyon filter, quantum stabilizer, magnetic deinterlacer. Mr. Blue nodded, adjusted his indigo tie, and left. Saber followed him. They heard the stranded time lady cursing and screaming, promising vengeance from the wrath of hell and so forth. Her echoes following the Time Lord and Time Agent all through the Sid Rat's ancient labs and foyers. Mr. Blue looked at Saber. "You ready for this?" She put her arm around him and fired a grappling anchor from somewhere in the tech suit. As she and her Time Lord sped to the ceiling, she encased in armor. The inertia impact of her force and density against the fragile cold steel door shattered it. The pair flew through the air. The stranger in cobalt screamed like a woman briefly, as Saber readjusted and landed with Mr. Blue in her arms. Yes, we landed. Thank you." He dismounted and quickly ran his fingers through his platinum hair. Powerful blasts of piercing cold and gusting ice shards pummeled them as they made their way back to Purge's crash site. The Time Lord's watch indicated as they came closer. There was a familiar roar in the distance. "You have got to be kidding me," Saber shouted. "What?" Mr. Blue gripped his azure tie for some reason, as if keeping it from flapping in the wind and an ice hurricane mattered. The superhuman time agent shoved him aside. The pair moved exactly as a large boulder landed in the space they occupied a split second earlier, with a horrendous crushing sound. "No, I am tired of this shit. Just no!" Saber yelled out to the creature. The abominable snow beast screeched and came to life right in front of her, seeming to emerge from the icy mountain beneath them. It was a part of the mountain. It was tremendous. Saber blasted it with her vortex manipulator. It disappeared. Mr. Blue looked over at her. "Nice." She gripped his shoulder, and they slid down to the other side of the snow and ice hill, to the crash site of Purge. The pair of time travelers spent more time than they would have preferred digging the time capsule out of a mammoth amount of frozen ice and rock, blue and red lasers cutting it out of the cold tundra. The stranger in the cobalt suit activated the outer real-world interface with his time watch, and the two forcefully entered Purge. It didn't take long for Mr. Blue and Saber to instill the parts they'd pilfered from the stranded High-Lady's proto-time capsule. Purge awoke, purring to life, warming up. Every piece of technology brightened. Blue, indigo, cobalt, cerulean, sky-tinted steel, and Admiral dial, panel, display screen, indicator lights, all of it awoke. "Greetings. What the hell took you so long?" Purge demanded overhead from the intercom, voice echoing. Purge's control console beamed with lapis and chrome, the blue marble time rotor awaiting deployment. The Time Lord and his time agent approached it with triumph. Mr. Blue opened a communication channel to Deceit Sidrat. "Not to worry," he smiled, his dark blue eyes shining. "Now that Purge is fully functional, we're going to destabilize your temporal waveform, negating the effects and reversing the wave, sending all the families back to the respective times." Deceit sat, shackled to the time rotor of her dead Sidrat, next to her dead EM wrench, and looked incredibly forlorn. "So you just gonna leave me here to sit and ride? Handcuffed with carbonadium?" Saber was about to say something, yet the Blue Time Lord interrupted. "You can't break out of those. This is true. Only a precaution so that we know exactly where you are, stuck in your trap, which didn't work, with your silly little plans and your silly little time toys, which also didn't work." "Son of a bitch," Deceit muttered angrily. "As you said, not to worry. I will be back for you." He ended the communication. Mr. Blue took a deep breath and sighed. "Shall we?" Saber smiled. "Allow me." And she pressed the button. The cloister bell sounded for a brief moment. Then, all the panels in Purge went dead. She had time to look at Mr. Blue and blink before the power immediately drained and Purge was gone. Just a lifeless piece of coral floating in the atmosphere. Lights out. Again. "What the f—" The Time Lord shouted in the darkness as the Cobalt Grandfather clock smashed to the surface once more. Her normal, beautiful echo of mechanical angels twisted into the eerie and sickening chorus of anguished moans. Then there was nothing. The time agent picked up Mr. Blue. He started to adjust his tie, but instead trod through the countless piles of debris and wires and metal and coral, all destroyed and drained. He slammed himself on the console, desperately pressing the only lit panel he could make out in the near absolute dark. The green hollow screen warped to life over the time rotor, cracked and grainy. Mr. Blue and Saber watched Deceit fiddle with the shackle for a moment, then stand and simply walk away, about as difficult for her as taking off a bracelet. The Time Lady walked to her Sidrat time rotor, looking back at them over her shoulder. I want to thank you in all sincerity. She slowly turned to face them. I was stranded here centuries ago by the High Lords before the Time War even started. See, I had been inspired once. A renegade Time Lord that I was in love with stole a TARDIS, set off into the cosmos. He made it seem so romantic. I wanted to get away as well. I was even able to latch on and transmute a Sidrat I had found partially conscious in another reality, a remnant of Lord Valentine, the paradox sorcerer. Naturally, I set up the thermo-vortex barrier around Vrem, a giant net in space-time continuum. I've been scavenging parts of time vessels which found themselves stranded here and there. Yet, I knew one day my real opportunity would present itself, and it's been such a long time. What would you suppose? Lucky enough I caught 2 very, very naive time travelers. Ha! Saber slowly turned her attention to Mr. Blue. He was furious. He grabbed his platinum hair tightly, appeared as if he was going to roar as he pulled it out of his head. The seat continued calmly, pressing buttons on the Sidrat rotor, making it glow brighter, hum louder in intensity as she inquired, What 3 parts did you need when you crashed here? Tachyon filter? Quantum stabilizer? Magnetic de-interlacer? Saber looked down and sighed, her hand on her forehead. Those parts, combined, create a specific circuit in a TARDIS. What circuit is that? The seat needled him, chided him on, sadistically enjoying herself. A flex circuit panel working with binary influx valves to create vortex barrier inverter. Exactly what we need to get off the planet, Saber thought out loud. Exactly what we need to do anything, you bloody idiot! The irate Time Lord shouted with his hands flailing out in the air. The seat grinned, facing the stranded time-traveling pair. They're my parts, you morons. Ever heard of a Trojan horse? Mr. Blue and Saber watched the Sidrat time rotor become emblazoned with life, with power and life stolen from the already crippled Purge. They witnessed the temporal cascade release unlimited time energy, a perfect waveform, into a theoretical temporal battery. The seat laughed. What's happening? Saber asked, somewhat pensive. The Time Lord was distant, angry. The temporal cascade is now activated, and the temporal reversal waveform is complete. My God, all those families! The families? What's happening to the families? Saber demanded. Mr. Blue was distant, giving Deceit enough power to transform her Sidrat into a paradox time machine, which, in theory, created itself an ever-TARDIS. Deceit was wickedly cackling in the background. Thanks for everything, love. Enjoy eternity on this worthless rock of steel time. That was the last sound Mr. Blue and Saber heard Purge make. All systems were indeed silent and completely dead. The time agent stared at him in the darkness, suddenly not recognizing him. Capesiolonicoricves traveler? What about the families? What's going to happen to all those people? Mr. Blue lowered his head. Somehow, knowing his cobalt suit and azure tie were caked with dust and ice and blood and snow, even without seeing it, the Time Lord collapsed into a chair, not bothering to dust himself off. He had been beaten. Saber put her arms around herself, instinctively to ward off the cold. Regardless of what she did as she stood in the darkness, the chill never left the base of her neck. Inside, the ancient and yet brand new Ever-TARDIS looked fragile and delicate, Everything was sparkling white and plastic. Roundels softened the immensely and almost clinically whiteness and cleanliness of the literally infinite time machine. Deceit stepped to the time rotor, pressed a single button. There was a groan, a deep shake that could be heard across all space and time, a rumbling that could be felt in the vibration of the song in the heart of creation. The new time rotor ground up and down to life, with the sound of a mountain breathing. Deceit watched her hand crackle in eerie green light. She smiled, satisfied. Then the light enveloped her, as she had a total myocardial failure. She regenerated, releasing the final piece of High Lord data needed to create the real TARDIS, the Rassilon Impromptu. Then the Time Lady and her Ever-TARDIS simply disappeared to parts unknown.